Well, good afternoon and welcome back to another live iThemes training event. My name is Nathan Ingram. I'm the host here at iThemes Training, and I am joined today by Michael Moore. Michael has answered well over 7,000 support tickets in the over 2 years that he's been on the iThemes security support team. And this webinar is based on his experience with all of the common security issues that folks tend to write tickets in about. Especially the preventable issues. So we're going to talk through a lot of the settings within iThemes security. There are a lot of them, and chances are, especially if you are fairly new to WordPress, or even if you've been using it for a while, the number of settings in iThemes security, it can be a little overwhelming. Once you get into it and kind of see what they're doing, they start to make sense. But what we want to do today is just give you a broad overview of all the really neat stuff iThemes security can do to help to lock down your website. And Michael's going to help us out with that. So Michael, man, it's great to have you back on iThemes Training.
Well, I am very excited to be back. Thanks for letting me do another one.
Absolutely. So again, we're glad you all are with us today as well. Several folks just now coming in to go to webinars. So if you haven't made it over to the chat room, that is located at iThemes.com/chat. iThemes.com/chat. Folks are logging in from across the United States and around the world, and we are glad you're all with us. I'm going to drop the handout link in the chat one more time. So if you haven't grabbed that, please do so. It's a summary of all the settings that we're going to be talking about today. And Michael's going to walk through all the things that you need to do to set up iThemes security on your website. So, Michael, why is it important to really get a good understanding of all these settings?
Just to get rid of the confusion. That way you know exactly what setting is, how each setting is protecting your site. That way if you ever need to troubleshoot any of the features, you have a better understanding of what they are doing.
Absolutely. So let's do a quick poll in the chat room. How many of you folks are active users of iThemes security now? Just give us a yes or a no there in the chat. Are you currently using iThemes security? Yeah, so lots of users. Awesome. So hopefully as you leave this webinar, you'll have a better understanding of some of those granular settings that can really help you protect your website. So, Michael, let's just start at the top. And again,
all right,
I'm going to drop in the handout one more time. And by the way, before we jump in there with you, Michael, let me just mention, if you have a question as we go, we're going to try to take questions in context today. So if Michael is explaining something that you don't quite understand, please drop that question in the chat room and preface your question with the word question in all uppercase. And I'll try to get that question to Michael right as we're dealing with that particular issue. And if we miss any, we'll wrap everything up at the end with a full Q&A on anything that we missed during the webinar, and also just basic WordPress security questions if you have them. So with that, yeah, Michael, let's dive in now.
All right, well, let's start with the security check. Now, what this will do, it will automatically enable all the features that we recommend, that we also aren't scared about causing any kind of issue or conflicts on your site. You can run this multiple times, and we'll go ahead and hit that to activate the network root protection API, but you can run it multiple times, and it will not hurt anything. All it will do is re-enable any of the recommended settings that may have been disabled. And we won't go ahead and run through each of these details here. We'll go through what each of these settings do once we get to them on the security settings page. So the first group of settings is the global settings. This is the kind of basic important structure of iThemes security. And the first thing on there is write to files. And what this, by checking this box, what that does, it allows iThemes security to write to the wp-config and the htaccess. And the reason why this is important, this allows iThemes security to automatically write rules that ban specific IPs. The default hack repair list gets written there, and then like disabling PHP and uploads, automatic updates, all get written there, and so it's important to have that checked. Now the next setting is just the host lockout message, and this is what people are going to see if their IP has been locked out. You can make it whatever you want or just leave it the default. And the user lockout message, very similar to the host lockout message, but this is if the username has been locked out. An example of this would be if during a brute force attack, the username was locked out, or the username was locked out, and also the attacker's IP was locked out. When you go to log into your site, you would see the user lockout message. And then the community lockout message is what someone will see if their IP has been flagged as a threat by the iThemes security network. So if you enable the network brute force protection API and an IP from that list tries to attack your site, this is the error message that they will see. And then enable the blacklist of repeat offenders. What this does, this allows iThemes security to ban people who repeatedly get locked out. So if they're like the blacklist threshold, if they get locked out 3 times, the IP is going to be added to the ban list. Now the blacklist look back period is how many days the lockout will be remembered. So if I do an invalid login attempt today, like let's just say I enter in the incorrect username and password, then that will count towards a lockout for me for the next 7 days, so for a week. And the look back period is the length of time a host or user the length of time to remember the lockout. So you don't want to have that number too high, because you want it low enough that bad actors are allowed to go ahead and get locked out. That way they can meet the requirements from the ban and then get added to the ban list.
So, Michael, what you're saying is basically that if someone is locked out, in this case with these settings, 3 times within 7 days, then they're permanently blacklisted.
Yes, and the lockout, I explained this lockout period not as clear as I should have. And the lockout period is just the length of time that the lockout will last. So if I get, using your example, if I get locked out after being blacklisted 3 different times, I will be, or I'll get locked out, then it'll last for 15 minutes. Once that clears, and then another lockout happens, that'll be the third or the second lockout, it clears, and then the third lockout, they'll get added to the ban list.
Okay, so the first time a user gets locked out, it'll be locked out for that specified lockout period, right?
Correct.
But then if that lockout happens within 3 times within 7 days, you can change those settings, then they're permanently banned and they go on the ban list.
Yes. Okay, and the lockout whitelist is you can add any IP here that you do not want to get locked out. Now, this will prevent their IP from being locked out, but if their username is being used in a brute force attack, that username can still be locked out. The person with the whitelist IP cannot lock out their own username, though. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so any login from it, that the list from this whitelist is going to be allowed to log in unless that username is locked out.
Correct.
Got it.
Correct. And they will, any IP logging in will not affect any of the blacklist or lockout settings. And then log type. This is how do you want your logs to be kept? By default, as database, I would recommend keeping it here just because it makes it easier and faster to retrieve, and also more things can be stored and shown in the logs. And then days to keep the logs, the default is 60 days. If you want to make it less than that, feel free to shorten it. So let's say using our invalid login attempt example, that will be logged, it will be kept in the logs for 60 days until that log entry is automatically purged from the logs. Allow data iThemes to track data anonymously. Right now, this since the GDPR came out, we aren't actually tracking any data right now. So just full disclosure there. Override proxy detection. Let's say that you're using like Varnish or Cloudflare, and so I am attacking your site, but since you're going through Cloudflare, all your site is getting is the Cloudflare IP and not my IP. And so what this does, it tries to get a more accurate, get my IP instead of Cloudflare's IP. So my IP will be blocked from continuing to attack the site. And then hide security in the admin menu just removes this from your admin bar. Show error codes. These are the error codes that we mentioned earlier. The lockout message, the host, user, and community lockout messages. And then if you enable the gray report, this is going to allow the gray report settings to show in the on the main page of the security settings.
Fantastic. Now, before we go any much further out of here, could you scroll back up to the iThemes security network settings? And this is one of the really nice features of iThemes security is this network of sites. Can you tell us a little bit about how that works?
I can't because it's not disclosed, and I have asked about that before, and they won't tell me, so I can't.
So we could tell you, but then we'd have to kill you. But
exactly.
So basically, what to the end user, what difference does the network make?
It makes a lot of difference because if you enable the network brute force protection API, so if like my site and just for example 10 other sites both lock out the same exact IP, that IP will get added to the network brute force protection lockout list. So before they even have a chance to get locked out on your site, they just won't be able to access your site. You'll be like, oh no, you've been flagged as a known bad actor. You go ahead, turn around, don't even try. It's not going to work. We already know about you. So
what criteria? So like if a person is blacklisted on my site, they'll be blacklisted on your site as well?
No, it has to be blacklisted on, I don't know the exact number of sites, but it has to be blacklisted on a multiple of the iThemes user sites that have the network brute force protection API activated. So once it gets blacklisted from a specific number of sites, it'll get added to the global blacklist and then be blacklisted on everyone's site.
Perfect. So this is a great way that as a community, we as iThemes security users are actually helping to keep each other's sites secure by running the brute force network.
Yes, exactly.
Perfect. Again, and folks, if you have questions as we're running through these settings, please drop those in the chat room, iThemes.com/chat, and I'll do my best to get those to Michael as we go. JJ was asking, where is that setting again for the brute force connection? If you could just roll back there.
Yeah, it's going to be to actually activate the network brute force protection. You'll be on the main page of the security settings. You just configure this, and then I'll just click this reset API. You just enter in your email address, and then save the settings, and then it'll be activated.
And you're in. Fantastic.
And then that's all done from our end. So after you enable it, you don't have to worry about that anymore. Set it and forget it.
Great. If you have any other questions about these things, drop them in the chat room. Again, iThemes.com/chat. All right, let's move forward.
Yeah, we'd love to answer them. Okay, the notification center is it's great because this is where you can manage the different notifications you receive and then who will receive them. So the from email is what will be shown as the sender email. If you just want to be the WordPress default, just leave it blank, and then it'll automatically just grab the WordPress default that's defined in the WordPress general settings, I believe. And the default recipients, I don't have a lot of users on this site, but if I were to have some more on there, you could set the default recipients. So any of the notifications below that have the option to just send to the default recipients, they'll just be the ones, those notifications will only be sent to the ones in this list. And if there's any new features that come out and that are enabled, instead of sending to like all administrators, it will send to the default recipients list. That way, you can have a specific list that you trust to see those emails. And if you don't want any of your customers or clients to see those specific emails, you can just leave them out of it and not have to worry about it. Because the last thing we want to do is create more work for you to answer questions that are just going to bog down your day. Now, the automatic updates infos, this one is generated by the version management setting. So anytime the version management automatically updates any of the plugins or themes, you'll get an email about it. The database backup, you're simply just choosing what email address or addresses that you want to receive the database backups when those are made. The file change detection email, anytime the file change scans picks up on any changes, you will receive a notification. Grade report change, if you want to be notified if the iThemes security grade report feature has changed your grade for whatever reason, you can get that email. That way you can stay on top of that. Inactive users, this one is cool because if you are, this is sent by the user security check module. If you have like admin users on your site that are no longer active or logging into the site, just get rid of them. Just delete them or send them a reminder. Hey, you want to keep your admin like status. You might want to actually be doing stuff on the site, because otherwise, that dormant account is just an unwanted access point. The magic login link is the link that if you get locked out, like let's say you're under a brute force attack and you can't log in because your username is locked out, this is the email that will get sent, that you can click the magic link to bypass the username lockout. Malware scan results, this is the email that you want, excuse me, this is the email you'll receive if the security malware scan finds any issues or has any repeated troubles actually scanning the site. The security digest is cool because you can choose how often you want to receive specific notifications. During periods of heavy attack, iThemes Security likes to send you emails because it just wants a pat on the back for you to tell it it's doing a great job. And so it's going to tell you that it's locked out 15 different users, but that's going to generate a lot more emails for you to go through. So you can just enable this and then disable the lockout notifications to reduce the amount of notifications you receive. You can also, this will also include like the file change scan. So you can delete the file change scan. So you can just get a summary of like lockouts, file change detections, privilege escalations, in one email instead of having to sort through multiple emails. The settings export is the email that you'll receive that will have your JSON settings. So if you want to export the settings from this site to import into a new site, choose which email address you want to get those settings. Site lockouts, this is just the lockout notification. Two-factor email, if you have email, the two-factor email method enabled, this is the message that you can customize to send to the people, to the users. The two-factor email confirmation is the email that actually contains the authentication code for users. Two-factor reminder notice, if you have like a requirement for all admins to use two-factor, you can send a two-factor reminder to them to go ahead and set it up. And we'll look more at that once we get to the user security check settings. Any questions about notification centers before we move on?
No questions have come in, folks. Oh yeah, all right. So TC wanted to know the file change reports and the security reports. How much of the hosting resources do those things use? Is it a drag on the site performance?
The scan itself, or the generating of the notifications takes it requires like almost no resources. The file chain scan, the initial file chain scan, can be a little bit more resource intensive, and is probably the most resource intensive feature of the plugin. But the developers have made great strides in reducing the impact on your site, because instead of trying to do it in one fell swoop, it'll kind of just chunk through your site to get to index it, and then it will just slowly just go through these files to make sure nothing has changed on them. So after the first one, the resource requirement drastically reduces. And what was the other one he asked for?
File change reports and just the basic security reports.
Oh yeah, the like lockout notifications, stuff like that. That's not going to take really anything.
Right. And TC, just from a user's perspective, in my client work, I'm supporting, close to 100 sites that are running iThemes security, and I don't see any performance issues at all on those. JJ is asking what the file change scan is for, what files?
You can look to see exactly which one it indexes, but so within that WordPress install, directory, it will go ahead by default index all of that. But once we get to the file change detection, I'll go a little bit more into that.
Perfect.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to the 404 detection settings. And what this does, this is iThemes security will detect a particular IP trying to hit too many 404s, like just looking for different security vulnerabilities. And so once it hits the threshold of 404s, they'll get added to the that IP will be locked out. And then once, if it keeps repeating that bad behavior, once it hits 3 lockouts, it'll be permanently banned. Minutes to remember the 404 error is going to be 5 minutes. And then the error threshold starts at 20 by default, but you can change that to whatever you feel like is appropriate for your site. And then here is, let's say for some reason, like you have like a legitimate 404 on your site that, like I know sometimes with some of the Microsoft products, it can like ping for a file that doesn't exist, but it'll constantly just look for it. You can add that URL to the whitelist here. That way the 404 won't count towards a lockout. It will still be recorded in the security logs, but that way you don't have to worry about locking out legitimate users who are being redirected to that URL. And then here we have just certain file types that you can ignore. That way, these are common file types that will sometimes just 404, and then you don't have to worry about those counting against legitimate users and causing them to be locked out from your site. So pretty basic stuff here. It's just another way iThemes for security protects you against people looking for vulnerabilities.
So this could be helpful. For example, I know, Michael, am I right that a lot of hackers will just set up some scripts that are pounding away at the WordPress site trying to find open doors, and this sort of prevents that?
Yes. Well, it's just, I know in our last webinar, you had mentioned that you had someone in the chat mentioned that they had been getting hit by Amazon IPs that were hitting 404s. And then you said you had also had the same experience.
Right.
And then literally right after the webinar, I went on one of my personal sites and saw that I had the same growth of Amazon IPs just pounding my site, just looking for vulnerabilities. And this site had barely been up and was still in maintenance mode. So they just sniff out anything WordPress and just start scanning it for vulnerabilities.
And by the way, that's not Amazon proper. That's hackers using Amazon servers, right?
Yes.
Spinning up Amazon Web Services servers to try to attack WordPress sites. Yeah.
Yes, Amazon. Yeah, they don't want to attack your site. They just want your money. And if we don't have any other questions on that, we can move on.
Yeah, we can press forward.
Yeah, I'll try to pick up the pace a little bit too, because I didn't realize I've been talking for so long. So what away mode does, away mode, you can set specific times that no one can log into your site. So let's say that you want, that from 10 p.m. at night to 6 a.m. in the morning, you or no other user that has access to the back end needs to get into the site. So you can enable this, and when anyone tries to access your login page, they just get redirected to the home page, so they don't even have an opportunity to put anything into a login form. And then you can set the type of restriction you want, daily or one time, and then this is the time that people start being redirected to the home page, and this is the end time when people will actually be able to use and access the login page. I'm going to move on to banned users settings. The first thing on here, as you'll see, is the default blacklist. We use the hackrepair.com's blacklist. And so if you enable this, we will automatically block bad actors that the hackrepair.com has identified as people and user agents that should not even be sniffing your site. And then when you enable the ban list, you allow IPs to actually be permanently banned from your site. And this is where iThemes security, once they meet the iThemes security requirement for a ban, that they'll be added to the ban list here. And then if you see any IPs that you want to manually add to the ban list, you can add it here and then save the settings, and that will get written to the htaccess. So once an IP is in the ban list, if they type in your URL, all they'll see is a 403 error saying they don't have permission to access the site. This is where you can add different user agents. If you have like a specific user agent that you don't recognize and it's just been pounding and sniffing your site, you can throw it on there to grant them access to the site. Then,
now, Michael, going back, we did have a question come in about away mode from Becky.
Yeah.
She wanted to know, does away mode apply to all the administrator users, everyone completely?
Yes. If you enable away mode, no one will be able to access the login page.
Gotcha.
So you want to use this when you know no one is going to try to do any kind of work. If you have sync, you can used to be over. Sorry, I misspoke. You're not able to override away mode. But if you do accidentally enable this, there is a way to disable it by logging in via FTP. So if you ever need to get back in, just open up a support ticket, and then we'll tell you how to disable it.
Yeah, so it's sort of like, you see the signs at the front of shops that managers do not have access to the safe. It's the same sort of thing.
That is a perfect analogy. Thank you.
JJ wanted to know on that time lockout, does it lock out all users, including customers, or just administrator users?
The away mode, it's okay. Let's say you have a front login page. People will still be able to access the front end login page. All this does is, so if you're trying to go to your wplogin.php, your site, wplogin.php, it just redirects you back to the homepage of your site. So most likely customers aren't going to be logging in on the front end on the back end of your site. So you have your WooCommerce login page. They'll still be able to access that.
Got it. Good question. All right, let's roll forward.
All right, database backups. All this is doing is backing up the database of your site. So you can check this box, and that will back up the complete database of your site. But if not, if you don't check the box, it'll just back up this site's database. So like on this server, there's a few sites on here. If I check that box, it'll back up all of my site's database and not just this one. And the backup method is, how do you want to get this received? You just want email only? You want to save it locally? You want both? I just set to email. That way you don't have, I don't recommend keeping any of your backups stored locally. Just because it's better to have it in an offsite destination in case someone can sniff it and then use that to exploit your site. So again, I would keep that email only. You can set the backups to retain if you're saving locally, if you're storing them locally. Setting 0 will retain all backups. So if you are, I would recommend, just since they're just database backups, I would recommend just keeping the most recent one, because you're not going to be able to like restore pages. This is just going to be your database settings. And then you can exclude different tables that you may not want to be included, including the security logs or whatever else that you might not want to include. And then you can also enable a schedule, so you can have your backups, your database automatically backed up and sent to you as often as you would like.
Now, on that backup, and this is a question that we usually get when we get to that setting, how does that work with Backup Buddy? If I'm using iThemes Backup Buddy, do I need to do this database backup within iThemes security? What do you think?
No. If you're using backup, this you're gonna have to do a manual restore and follow the directions on the WordPress codex how to do that. Backup Buddy, what that does, it backs up your full site and your database, and using importbuddy.php makes it so easy just to restore it, which actually has saved my bacon before. I was dropping tables and cleaning up my database, and I dropped the wrong tables, and luckily I had the Backup Buddy backup of my database, and I restored it in like literally 2 minutes. So this is Backup Buddies they back up the same thing, but Backup Buddy gives you an easy way to restore it.
And I just dropped a link into the chat room as well with a recent webinar we did on migrating and restoring websites with Backup Buddy. So it's just a more robust backup solution. This is just
Yes.
What you find in iThemes Security is a basic backup for the database. Works fine. Backup Buddy is a much better backup solution.
Yes, absolutely.
So yes, Robert, exactly. Just disable that if you're using Backup Buddy.
Yeah, perfect. I'm going to go ahead and move on to file change detection. And then you have an option to go to scan your files now. And this will run through all the index files of your WordPress install and notify you of any changes. You can exclude files and folders. Common practice, like just would be to exclude any caching or backup files. And the reason why you want to do this is just because they're going to be updating on a near daily basis, and things that you know are going to make a lot of changes. It's going to generate a lot of notifications, and you can just go ahead and get those out to quiet the noise. That way you can focus on what's really important and see what has actually changed. So let's say that, like, I know my site's getting attacked a bunch right now, and I don't want to get a bunch of notifications. I can just minus the red HT access, and I'll no longer be notified of any changes that are affecting the HT access. There's certain file types that are ignored. The reason why we have these ignored is because it's quite rare to actually exploit these files, and it's really not a concern that you're going to have to worry about, because most of these are like non-executable files. So they're not going to be able to exploit them or run them. And that way, if these do change, again, quiet the noise. Let's focus on what's important. Let's get rid of the distractions. And display a file change admin warning. This is just going to give you like an admin notice in your WordPress dashboard. Like when you log into your site, you'll see at the top, it'll say file change scan, picked up on a change, click here, and you can see what changed in the logs. And then compare files online. This is really, really cool, because what this does, let's say that there was an update to one of the .org like plugins or themes. It will compare the file hash of your file that changed to the online version of the latest. We'll just use iThemes Security free version, and it'll see the file hash of the one on the .org repo and see the one on yours is the same. So it'll say, okay, that's just an update. We won't include this in the file change scan or in the file change notification. And because with the comparison of the file hashes, you know this has not been modified. This is the pristine version. This is the authentic copy of the file that you want on your site. So that's going to do that with WordPress core. If those core files get edited in any way, it's going to compare the file hash to the one stored on the WordPress.org repo. And you know, okay, file hashes are the same. They match up. This is not a threat. And it's just that WordPress core files, WordPress.org, plugins and themes, and iThemes products.
So Melanie just had a great question in the chat, and it's one that I think we've seen a lot as well. When you get those warnings about a file change, she says she's not quite sure what to do or how, you know, if it's something she needs to be concerned with. When you get one of these messages, what should you focus on?
Okay, let's say, let me see if I have.
And by that, I'm talking about obviously the file. You know, I get an email that says, "Hey, a bunch of files have changed on your website."
Okay, so let's see, what is this? This is an example of a file change in the log entry, and you can see that 2017 files were modified. And I know because when I was messing around with this, it was just an update of the 2017 theme. And so if the change made wasn't expected, like let's say a file was updated or a file was changed, but it wasn't updated, you can compare that file to one from a recent backup to see exactly what was changed and see if there's anything out of the ordinary there. And or even compare it to, let's say, again, let's just use iThemes security as an example. Let's say you get a notification saying that the one of the files in that iThemes security directory was modified. You can go and download a version of that plugin and compare those two file types, which you can do easily in a text editor to see if there's any differences between the two. And if there's a difference, then there's a good chance that that site has been maliciously, or that file has been maliciously changed. But if they're the same, most likely it was just an update. So it is going to, like, if you do get notified of a change, it is going to take a little bit of investigation on your end to see what exactly was changed. And then if it was something that you need to be concerned about.
Now, Michael, there's a question on how you got to that screen. So that's just under security on the log screen. Is that right?
That is correct. I'll show you. Yeah, right up here at the top, just click view logs. And then this is just the important events, and that just shows the things that actually happened. And like, it looks like a couple months ago, I had a file change scan fail. And then that was my last time I had a file change.
And so Kim also has a great comment there in the chat about excluding folders where you know changes are going to happen. For example, the Backup Buddy folder where it puts its backups. Those are always going to change. Another tip that I would suggest, Melanie, is if hopefully you're using iThemes Sync as a management platform for the websites that you have control over. Running all of your updates on all of your sites at the same time, once a week, for example. That way, if the file change warnings come out and it was about that time when you did updates, then you're pretty certain that it was probably one of those plugins that it's gotten that was updated. The other thing, as Michael, if you could open up one of those logs again as well, real quick, that showed the file change status. When you are viewing here we go. So when you're viewing the log, you can kind of see a pattern to the file structure. So WP content, and then you'll see plugins, and then a whole bunch of files underneath that plugin that was just updated. Well, then obviously that's pretty safe to say. But if you look, this is a file that's got a weird name in the root of the site, that might be a problem. Does that sound about right, Michael?
Yes, that is definitely correct.
So any other questions on this? That's several good questions here. If you have another question, just drop that in the chat. If you've joined us late, several folks have popped in. The chat room is at ithemes.com/chat. Michael, I think we can go ahead, and if anybody else has questions, we'll get to those.
All right, this is the file permission module. You can load your file permissions, and you can see what the recommended value of the the iThemes security recommended value and the recommended value, or the actual value of your file. And if they are not the same, you can change them, or if it's at a level that you're comfortable with, because some of ours recommendations are going to be different than some of the recommendations even of WordPress.org and their guidelines. So these are just our suggestions, the value, and if you feel like you would feel more comfortable with our value, you can just change them and by logging into your server via FTP and then managing your permissions there. And then here we're going to the local brute force protection. This is going to be another place where you can kind of set your requirements for like what is going to be qualified as a lockout. So the max login intents per host, this is the IP that is logging in, how many chances they're going to get before they get locked out. The max login attempts per user, how many login attempts are they going to get before they get locked out? Because you want to give some flexibility, because if you have customers, logging in with the incorrect username and password, you don't want to lock them out immediately. You want to give them some flexibility in order to make their mistake without having to come to you and say, hey, I'm locked out. I want to get in. I want to buy things, but I can't. And then remember minutes to remember a bad login. This is the length of time that a bad login attempt will count towards one of these lockouts. And then automatically ban. This is misleading. It's automatically locks out an admin user. I'm not sure why this terminology is used, so I just want to make it very clear that you can, when you check this box, anyone that logs in tries to use the admin username, which you have a lot of dumb bots that will just try admin as the username and password, it'll go ahead and lock them out, but they will not be banned until they meet the requirements you set for a ban. But it's still a good thing to enable, because you're just getting rid of these, like Nathan mentioned earlier, there's just these bots that run these scripts just looking for vulnerabilities and looking for weak access points, and one of the things they'll use is this admin as the username. And then the network brute force protection API is what we talked about earlier. Great feature. Definitely recommend everyone enabling this and getting their API keys. So like Nathan said, we can all work together to build a strong network of known bad actors. And then we're going to the password requirements, which is, this is one of my favorite modules of settings of the whole plugin, just because having a strong password is one of the very first things you can do to really add a strong layer of security to your site. And that's what it's all about. It's just adding strong layer after strong layer after strong layer to prevent any bad actors from being successful. So the very first thing that you can see on here, if you can click the force password change, then the next time everyone logs in, they'll be forced to reset their password. And then let's say that you accidentally click it, not a big deal, because you can just undo it. And then people will no longer be required to change their password. I do recommend enabling strong passwords, at least for the minimum role of administrators, because unfortunately, if you can't, not everyone is going to be security minded. Like, you guys are security minded. You guys are showing up here to this webinar because you have a general interest in the safety of your site. That can't be said for everyone. And if you have other administrator users on your site and they're using a weak password, it's just making your site vulnerable, because they can go in and make any change that they want to as an admin. So I definitely would recommend anyone who can edit the site. So I'd go all the way down to editor or even author to ensure everyone has a strong password. Now you can set the password to expire. That you can, so if, like, by default it's 120 days. So if I set a password today, 120 days from now, I'll be required to use a new password. And then this is a newer feature. They refuse compromised password. This uses the Have I Been Pawned API, and it sends encrypted information to the API to see if the combination of username and password has been compromised. And if it has, they will not be able to use that password on your site. And this just adds a very strong layer of security to your site, because there's plenty of times that, for example, with the Yahoo email dumps, those database username and password have been attacked more, like 4 or 5 major dumps. And these, I didn't know that mine was involved in that. And lots of times you have people who reuse the same username and password everywhere. And so even if it's a customer on your site and they're starting a new account on your site, and then they get they use the same username and password everywhere, and their account gets hacked, they're not going to blame themselves for using a known hacked username and password. They're going to blame you for not securing their account. I'll give you a perfect example of this. My dad had an account with the company. His account, he uses the same username and password everywhere. I installed LastPass on his browser, but he still won't use it. And his account got hacked, and he complained to the company. The company went ahead and ate it and didn't tell him like it was your fault. And my dad was telling me about it, and I looked up his username and password. I'm like, well, that's the problem. It's been hacked. Like you need to change this username and password everywhere because it's already been hacked. And so they got this account. Who knows what other accounts they have of yours? So, moral of the story is that my dad was still blaming the company of his attacked account instead of himself. Anyone have any questions over any of that?
No questions put in, but Melanie makes a great comment in the chat. She says she gets a lot of pushback on complex passwords. I have the same problem, and it's just one of those pieces of education, I think, Melanie, that we have to, obviously you can't make them use secure. Well, I mean, you can with the plugin, but you can't change someone's mind necessarily. You can just educate them and explain why it's so important. But I mean, really, it's like, would you put your credit card number PIN on the side of your car? I mean, it's sort of the same thing. Why would you use the same password on every single site? You're just asking for trouble. Cam is asking, what is the link to check if your passwords have been compromised?
It is.
I believe that. Go ahead.
Oh, it's
haveibeenpawned.com.
pawn.com. Yeah.
There's the link in the chat.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a difficult thing to get people to do. And, I liken it to, let's say that someone made a bunch of copies of your keys and then told you exactly where to use it. And if they're using a hacked, if their account has been compromised and they're reusing that password everywhere, that key is literally available for anyone to find and then come use it on all their different accounts. It's like making a universal key to every one of your accounts that is known and that people can copy. It's I don't have a great answer for you on that one, because I know, like, at the end of the day, the people paying you win. That's the bottom line. And like Nathan said, all you can do is educate.
Yeah. So if you're working with clients, my biggest advice to you would be make sure there's something in your contract that says you're responsible for keeping strong passwords. And if anything happens to the website because your password was not strong and it got compromised, that's billable. It's a billable expense. That, even if they're under a WordPress maintenance plan, which I highly advocate doing if you're working with clients, that's part of my contract, is that if they're not keeping a strong password, then any hacks related to the website, because that password was compromised, they're going to pay to fix that.
I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead on a couple of these things. It's just because we're coming up to a time where we need to start wrapping up, and I want to make sure I highlight some of the important stuff. Some of my more preferred features. I'm going to definitely jump straight here to version management. And the reason why I want to jump here to version management is because keeping your site up to date is the most important thing you can do. It's the easiest step that you can do to mitigate risk on your site. The number one way WordPress sites get hacked, the number one way is by running outdated software. So there is nothing more important. You can have two-factor, you can have strong password, but you can have outdated software, and that can literally add a known access point to your site. If you have a plugin installed on your site that's outdated, that has a known vulnerability to it, you are literally handing blueprints to a hacker. Not literally a strong word, but you're handing blueprints and saying, hey, this is how you access my site. Don't even worry about the username, the password, the authentication code. Here, this is an exploit that you can use to just jump right in. So I get keeping up to date with everything is difficult, but you can enable automatic updates right here. You can set, if you need some delayed, you can delay the plugin, or excuse me, like let's use Akismet for the example. We want to delay it, and we're going to have a delay for 2 days. Same with themes. You can also add extra layers of protection to your site if you're running outdated software here. But really, the main thing I want you to take from here is that you can enable automatic updates. And who knows if it's a critical update that has a security patch in it, you're going to want it on your site. Another cool thing about this is once you enable the version management feature, going back to the file change detection, you get a file change notification. You can see that in the security logs, it'll be recorded as a version management update. And even though you didn't update it and was automatically updated, you can go and look to see when it was updated by the version management feature. Make sense? And then another thing I want to go over, this is one of the best features, is adding two-factor authentication. It is, again, one of the things that is difficult for people to use, but once it becomes part of your routine, I don't even think about it anymore. I have two-factor authentication on every single account that allows me to do it. And now, especially with my phone, I can just pull it up real quick, throw in the token, and it doesn't take really me any extra time to do it just because it's become part of my routine. But even if they are, let's say they do have that hacked password and they're using that hacked password, they still won't be able to log in because they're going to be required to have an extra authentication token to log in. So for example, let's say you enable the user type protection, and this will force privileged users to enter in an extra authentication token along with their username and password to log into your site. And so if you just set it up and they'll automatically get an email. So they enter their username and password, then they'll say, hey, an email or an authentication token has been sent to your email address. They go open up their email address, copy and paste it from the email address, paste it onto the login page, and they can log in. Where the bad actor, they have the hacked username and password. They put that in there. It says authentication token. There's no way they can get the authentication token because it's randomly generated. They're not going to be able to guess it. It just adds a great layer of protection to your site, especially if you're using the mobile app method for it. And then another great one that I like to go over real quick is the user logging. This is great because if this is going to record anytime let's say I escalate someone's privilege or I create a new user, that's going to be recorded in the log. So if your account does get hacked and they do create a new user, or they find a subscriber to take over and then escalate the privilege of that account, you're going to be notified. You're going to be able to see it in the security logs, and you're going to have great information to see exactly what was added and what they did to your site. That way you can go and mitigate any of the damage that they've done. And those last few parts I kind of went quickly over. Does anyone have any questions?
We're getting several questions, but not pertaining to that. So press on and we'll have a few to wrap up.
Sounds good. The user security check is another cool feature just to be aware of. You can see the last active. You can see the password strength. Typically, you can. I'm currently showed logged in 4 different locations just because I have been on different machines today doing different testing for some stuff. So that's why I'm logged in and at 4 other locations, but I can log out everywhere else. So let's say you don't expect to see your username logged in a bunch of other places. You can log out and it'll get rid of those sessions. And that way only this current session you're in is active. And then you can also see that I have two-factor enable on this account. And if I didn't, you could send me a reminder to say, hey, maybe you want to enable two-factor on your account. And then let's go ahead and go to the advanced page real quick. If you want to see what, let's say that an IP has been added to the ban list, but for some reason it's not actually banning it, you can look over here to see if it's actually in the server configure rules. And these are the rules that are going to be written to the HT access. And if the IP is here, go and double check to make sure it was written to the HT access. And then if it hadn't, for whatever reason, your server's not allowing iThemes security to write to the HT access, you can go ahead and copy and paste these rules into the HT access to ensure your bans are being enforced. Another thing is the high backend feature. This is one of the more popular features. It can add a nice layer of obscurity, but it is, I would definitely suggest relying on more proven security methods, such as strong passwords, two-factor authentication, or reCAPTCHA. All will provide a lot more security than just a simple obfuscation of your login address. Which another one I wanted to go over was the change content directory. Honestly, this particular feature causes more problems than it's worth. You only want to do it on fresh installs, and if you do it on an active site that's already been around and then you change this content directory, it can definitely cause problems. And then there are some plugins and themes that don't follow the WordPress best practices, and they'll hard code URLs. And if you change the WP content directory, it's going to make these plugins cause issues on your site. They're either not going to be able to perform the task they're trying to perform, or it might even prevent your site from loading up, because if it's a theme, a CSS file might not be able to load it, or if it might be calling for your functions.php, which will cause your site to crash if it can't get the necessary code to execute to actually pull your site up. So this is a layer of security through obscurity, and it honestly causes more problems than it's worth. And let's say that you installed a new WordPress site, but you just kind of went through the motions as you can do, just especially if you do install a lot of new sites for people and you forget to change the database prefix. Again, recommend only do this on fresh WordPress installs, but you can quickly change the database prefix to something else, and then it will go through all your database tables and for this site and update it to the new prefix. And I think that is about everything I wanted to cover, but I want to make sure we get any questions answered before we have to get out of here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a few questions that have popped in that were not answered so far. If you have a question that has not yet been asked, please drop that in the chat room over at iThemes.com/chat. Joan had a question early on. She was asking, when it comes to WordPress multi-site, Michael, do you activate the plugin on each site or the network?
Network activate it.
Okay, so there you go. It will network activate, Joan, and then, Michael, it protects all the sites underneath the network?
Yes.
Fantastic. Shannon came in right after I think we talked about the file changes, but her question is, how do you exclude some of those files like we were just talking about, like Backup Buddy files? We did not actually show that, so if we could show that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I gave a quick example of it just with the HT access, but I probably didn't make that clear enough. File change section, here we go. So this is a pretty minimal install site, but you can go in here and, for example, and go to your WP content, and then you can go to your uploads, and then sometimes your backup or cache will be over here, and then literally, like, let's say I just want to exclude any changes made to iThemes security. You click on that negative sign. It's going to move it from the included list to the excluded list. So anything made in this directory So that includes the backups, here's the away mode config file that we talked about earlier. If you log in via FTP and just remove that file, that will remove away mode. But so if there's any changes made to like the iThemes security logs, that's not going to be included because I excluded the iThemes security directory. Then you can go and exclude changes to specific plugins. Like if I don't want any change that is related to Kismet to be shown in my file change detection, I just click I don't know what, my mouse wheel is going crazy. Click the minus next to it, and now it's going to be excluded.
Got it. TC had a question. Say you set up two-factor authentication, and then you migrate the site somewhere else. Is that two-factor still going to work, or what's going to happen? Do you know?
No. Okay, if you migrate the site
to a different domain name.
To a different domain name, most likely it won't work. Like if it's still going to the email, it could still work. But if you're using like an authentication app, those are going to be like server time sensitive and may not work. But if you download backup codes, you can still log in. Or if you really need to, you can log into your site via FTP and just disable the iThemes security directory by renaming it iThemes Security Pro.bak, and that will temporarily disable the plugin for you to log in and make the necessary changes.
Perfect. Or TC, what you could do is just disable iThemes security, migrate the website. Well, actually, you couldn't do that either. You might just need to turn off two-factor and then turn it back on when you migrate the site that way as well. TC had another question here. Where do you see that log of each user's activity?
Okay, so now that I have, I didn't actually have user security enabled on the site, I don't believe. So now that it's enabled, I click Save Settings. You can choose which role you want to. So right now I just have it set to administrators. And then if you scroll all the way up to the top, you can view your security logs. And once something is recorded, you can go here and then you'll see something in...
Maybe if you just go activate and deactivate a plugin real quick.
Yeah, perfect. And that's just... Okay, so now you can see that we have some user logging recorded. So just click down here on the user logging, click the filter button, and you'll be able to see that I activated a Kismet, I activated Hello Dolly.
There we go. One last question here. Again, this is the last question I have saved, so if you have not gotten your question answered, please drop that in the chat, ithemes.com/chat. Bob would like to know, in the emails he gets for file changes and lockouts, there's something called lockout by host. What does that mean?
Oh, that is the host lockout, which is just the IP that was locked out.
Right. So when a lot of when we think of host, we think like Liquid Web or iThemes hosting or something like that. But host in this particular vocabulary has to do with an IP address, right?
That is correct. So message will say when a computer hosts, the IP is locked out, and the username lockout will be when an actual user and their username is locked out.
Got it. All right. Well, I think we've reached the end of the questions. Michael, thanks so much for taking some time with us today and walking through all the details of iThemes Security Pro. Somebody noted earlier, there's some of those things that are a little different with the free iThemes Security plugin, but a lot of those will be the same kinds of settings. So hopefully, even if you're using the free version, you were able to see a lot better of how those things work. Michael, any last words as we're wrapping up today for the folks?
Just, hey, thanks for showing up. And, I think it's cool that everyone who is here is interested in securing their site, because that just makes the internet safer for everyone. So thank you so much for caring.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are a iThemes Security Pro customer and you have a question and you submit that support form, chances are you'll talk with Michael at some point. He's done this quite a bit. So, Michael, thanks again for taking time out of your day to do this. Folks, thank you for being with us for the last hour and just a few minutes here. Hopefully it's been a good investment of your time and you know a lot better about how to secure your website with iThemes Security. My name is Nathan Ingram, and thanks again for joining us here on iThemes Training, where we go further together.